So the Blackberry Classic came out so many years ago, and I will definitely tell you, in a lot of ways, this was a very interesting phone that Blackberry made, and I will tell you, although I probably would not recommend buying this particular phone anymore, I still think we can take a look at some of these Blackberry phones and kind of use them as a case study of, what went right, what went wrong, and just kind of see what type of devices, are good nowadays compared to this one. Now, if you want to pick up some phones that I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the exterior, I will tell you the big thing about this particular phone and why a lot of Blackberry phones have gotten a resurgence this year was mostly due to that Blackberry movie that came out like a couple months ago or like last year. This was a very interesting thing because what ended up happening was because of that particular movie, they started, I think a lot of Blackberry phones started trending and a lot of my older Blackberry videos started trending as well. I didn't think it was that popular of a movie, but it was a good movie. I liked it. But I will tell you, they didn't talk about a lot of devices, including this one. But the Blackberry Classic, which came out back in 2014, so 10 years ago today, had a very interesting design to it, which I actually did like a lot. It looked pretty much exactly as you'd expect from any other Blackberry at that time. So when you take a look in 2014, if we were to kind of go back, think about other phones that came out in 2014. Phones like the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, phones like the iPhone 5S the year before, the Samsung Galaxy S4, the Galaxy S5. These types of phones came around exactly the same time as this one, including I think the Nexus 5 or something like that. When you think about it from that particular perspective, this particular device definitely looked very, very different. You had a keyboard on this thing, you had many buttons, and I think that's exactly what Blackberry was going for. They were still sticking to their old tried and true method, which at the time, a lot of people had already migrated from. It wasn't like 2009, 2010, where like iPhones were just coming around and getting popular. The iPhones were already very popular, and a lot of phone manufacturers already moved away from the QWERTY keyboards. So this thing was a very interesting approach at the time. It did have a 3.5-inch IPS LCD panel on it, which was 720p by 720p, so it's a squared panel. Now, the phone was rectangular, but having that panel basically be half of the phone is still kind of an issue, I think, right? That's why when BlackBerry made that BlackBerry Priv phone, I think in like 2016 or 2017, that was a very good choice from BlackBerry. I thought that was a very intelligent thing that they did, and I like that phone a lot. The BlackBerry Classic, I think on the other hand, was a little bit of a different story. I still look at this phone and I'm just like, I think design-wise it was like interesting. It still looked like a really good phone, but it was just not the time, I would say. Now you still had that standard buttons on the side too, and then you had the keyboard as well, which was just, again, taking up a lot of space on that particular device. And I, again, don't think it was a good choice, design-wise. Although it was a good feeling phone at the time, I definitely do think it hasn't really aged the best compared to a lot of other phones that came out around that same time, even including like an iPhone 6, for example. Now for the rest of the body, there's not really anything super crazy. Again, still like a good feeling phone for the most part. Definitely doesn't feel super ugly or outdated or anything like that. On the sides, you're getting your standard volume buttons and the rocker and everything like that. You're also getting a micro SD card slot on this phone as well, which is a very interesting thing to have. I love having expandable storage, and this particular phone was basically giving you that, which was a very, very nice thing. So that, again, in and of itself was a very awesome thing going on for this particular phone. And when I do look at something like the BlackBerry Classic, I definitely like this phone and appreciate this phone a lot because of that. Now, beyond that, on the back side, again, nothing super crazy. You're getting the camera setup, but basically like a plastic bag going on for the rest of this phone too. And that's kind of it. Some things that this phone doesn't have that a lot of phones even had in 2014, and all display, like no buttons. This thing, although like you still had home buttons back in 2014, this one was basically giving you a pretty outdated design already. It still felt very good, but the fact that half the panel was just half the phone really wasn't that great. I really would prefer a full screen phone for the most part. So from that particular perspective, that kind of covers it up there. Funny enough though, these things have gotten up, a little bit in the, I would say kind of in the used market. The pricing of these things are kind of all over the place, but it is still very interesting because a lot of people still look at a device like the BlackBerry Classic and they still actually want to buy it more so as a collector's item, more so than anything else, which is actually pretty crazy. So when it first retailed, it was much pricier than it is now, but even now they're still actually kind of selling for a decent price in the used market. In terms of the camera side of things, this thing, as I mentioned before, had a single 8-megapixel camera on the back and then a 2-megapixel camera on the front. Now, you can probably guess what type of camera this thing is. It really is not that great of a camera anymore. It is fairly outdated. It was already outdated kind of when it first came out, and it really just added to it, in this day and age. So when this thing first came out, like I mentioned, fairly okay camera. I'll say it was an okay camera in 2014. I think even the iPhone 6 camera wasn't the greatest. I feel like the iPhone 6S was a big upgrade, but at that time you already had phones that were shooting in 4K, and this phone really, it was only shooting in 1080p, which I think is fine because the iPhone 6 was also filming in that resolution as well. But this camera definitely is an outdated machine. I mean, even everything else across the side of it really isn't that great. I mean, this phone compared to phones nowadays, I mean, once again, you're missing out on multiple camera lenses, you're missing out on 4K, missing out on 8K on some. The features in this type of camera aren't that great, so it's kind of just all over the place. And that in and of itself, once again, is just kind of just another way this phone kind of took it out in like a certain opinion. So from that particular perspective, once again, that kind of covers it up there too. Now, in the other side of things, in terms of the overall software and longevity, these BlackBerry phones had BlackBerry OS, which you were able to install APK files on some versions of this type of phone, but for the most part, this is this is a very niche type of software, and a lot of people would only look at these types of softwares and want to get them because of because of the BlackBerry OS. A lot of people swear that this was the best, email machine at the time. How are you going to send emails without a keyboard or whatever? And the thing with this particular phone was like, yeah, maybe that's true, but why would you even want to do that? Why would you want to go backwards and be stuck in the past when you could move forward and get some of the newer technology? And that was another thing that I thought a lot about when I was reviewing like the BlackBerry Priv even. That thing had a pop-out keyboard, but like, again, why would you even need that if the keyboard on the screen is better than the keyboard that's actually like physical? So with this thing, I mean, it's done getting software support. It's been done getting software support for so many years now. So that's like another reason why this thing really isn't that much worth it in this particular, way as well. So that kind of covers it up there. Performance-wise, this thing at the time had that Qualcomm Snapdragon S4 Plus chipset with 2 gigabytes of RAM, which at the time, honestly, wasn't even that terrible. I mean, a lot of phones at the time had 3 gigabytes of RAM, and even the iPhone at the time had 1. So this really wasn't like a terrible thing at that time. But as I mentioned before, it really wasn't that great, and it's definitely showing its age in a lot of different ways as well. I would say quickly, the thing that BlackBerry kind of irked me with was that after they made a phone, they were quick to kind of go through and kind of like maybe unsupport it and kind of move on to the next thing. I guess once it didn't work, they didn't really give that much time for like letting a phone breathe, mostly because they were just kind of trying to like re-spark the past. And that was what the issue was with the BlackBerry Classic. Although it wasn't a terrible performing phone, I just didn't really like the software about it. And I do think in a lot of ways, when I take a look at the BlackBerry Classic, there were lots of things that this phone kind of did right. Like, I do think the design of this phone was interesting and definitely unique at the time. You were still getting expandable storage on this particular phone, which is really nice. A pretty big size battery at 2500 milliamp hours, which at the time was actually pretty big, and still like a decent display and a decent camera at the time. But when I look at this phone nowadays, I really don't think this phone is worth buying at all. This phone wasn't worth buying even back in 2017, and I definitely think in this day and age now, it really isn't worth buying either. You are much better off purchasing phones that are still supported with software. Think of phones like the Samsung Galaxy S21, the Google Pixel 5 and above, the iPhone, 10R and above. Those types of phones are the only ones I recommend buying. If you're going through and buying this type of phone in 2024 to use it, I could not recommend not doing that enough. Please avoid doing that. You're much better off buying phones that are still supported with software. So that pretty much covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.